Everyone at the gala noticed when she walked in, not because she was stunning or wore the latest designer label, but because she didn't. Her dress was plain, her shoes modest, and her hair pulled back without a touch of glamour. In a room full of diamonds, silk, and high society names, she stood out for all the wrong reasons. Some guests whispered, others laughed behind their glasses of champagne. But not one person offered her a seat or even a kind smile. What they didn't know was that she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was simply there to support her husband, who had been invited as a guest of honor. People brushed past her like she was invisible, treating her as if she didn't belong. The event was a swirl of designer gowns, polished smiles, and subtle arrogance. Waiters skipped her, organizers ignored her. Even when she tried to engage in small talk, she was politely dismissed, as though her presence somehow lowered the tone of the evening. All around her, the room buzzed with power and prestige, and yet she stood quietly, seemingly out of place, just a simple woman in a world that didn't see her. But what no one realized was that behind her quiet demeanor was someone with strength and grace, and more importantly, her husband, the man they were trying so hard to impress, noticed everything, every sideways glance, every slight, every laugh, and he didn't say a word, not at first. What happened next would leave the entire room speechless, because while they had been busy judging his wife, they had completely overlooked who he truly was, and what he was about to do would change the entire night. You'll want to see how one bold decision flipped the script in a way no one saw coming. Her name was Clara. She'd never cared much for luxury or attention. Raised in a small town by a schoolteacher mother and a mechanic father, she believed in hard work, kindness, and staying grounded. She married Daniel 10 years ago, long before he became the successful businessman he was now. Back then, he was just a man with a dream and a beat-up car that barely started in winter. Clara stood by him through it all, the long nights, the failed deals, the setbacks. She believed in him even when no one else did. Now, Daniel owned a company that most of the guests at the gala either worked with, wanted to work with, or were trying to impress. But Clara never let any of it change her. She didn't care for designer labels or red carpet events. Tonight, she only came because Daniel had asked her to. It was supposed to be a celebration, a recognition of his company's impact and success. But as soon as they arrived, he was pulled away. Handshakes, interviews, photos, while she was left standing by the edge of the room like she didn't exist. It wasn't just cold shoulders. It was the way people glanced at her and then looked away, as if they were embarrassed on her behalf. One woman even mistook her for part of the staff and asked for a glass of water. Clara didn't correct her. She simply smiled and walked away, and all the while Daniel watched. From across the room, between speeches and clinking glasses, he saw how they treated her. He noticed who turned their backs and who whispered behind manicured hands. But what no one at the gala realized was that Daniel had quietly been making a decision that would shift the entire evening and remind everyone exactly who was really in charge. Daniel wasn't a man who acted on impulse. He was calm, calculated, and had built his company with quiet discipline. But tonight, something stirred in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. As he watched Clara trying to smile through the silence, trying to hold her head up while people treated her like she was beneath them, a slow fire built in his chest. These weren't strangers. Many of them had benefited from his generosity, partnered with him, sat across his boardroom table, and yet they dismissed the most important person in his life as if she didn't matter. Meanwhile, Clara stepped outside for air. She stood by the garden edge, her fingers brushing over the petals of a flower bed, lost in thought. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. She'd always known this world could be shallow, but she never expected it to be this cruel. Still, she wasn't angry. Disappointed, yes, but her heart remained steady. She wasn't ashamed of who she was. What troubled her most was seeing how Daniel was being pulled deeper into a world that valued surface over substance. Inside, a few guests were beginning to wonder who she really was. One man, an investor named Craig, asked someone, "Is that woman alone, or did she sneak in?" Another laughed, joking that maybe she was a charity case. These words didn't reach Clara, but they reached Daniel, and that was enough. Then there was Lily, one of the younger executives at Daniel's firm. She noticed the tension in his face and quietly approached him. "You okay?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded but didn't speak. Lily glanced toward Clara, then back at him. "They don't know who she is, do they?" Daniel didn't answer. Not yet. But in his mind, the decision was already made. The gala they thought was theirs was about to take a dramatic turn. Daniel walked through the crowd like a man with a mission, his expression unreadable. The music played, the lights sparkled, and conversations flowed, but he wasn't hearing any of it. He passed clusters of executives who smiled too wide, guests who pretended not to notice Clara, and organizers who had gone out of their way to avoid her. His calm mask remained, but inside, the tension had reached its limit. Clara was still outside, unaware of the shift building inside her husband. She stood under the soft glow of garden lights, her fingers wrapped around a glass of water, not champagne. She had been through worse in life, much worse, but something about tonight stung deeper. Maybe it was the realization that no matter how far they'd come, some people would always judge her by her dress, not her heart. She wondered if Daniel even noticed. She hoped he hadn't. She didn't want to be the reason his night was ruined. Back inside, Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket and made a single call. Short, quiet, direct. No one heard what he said. He slipped it back in his jacket and turned toward the stage just as the host began thanking sponsors. The crowd clapped politely, unaware of the shift in energy. Lily, still watching him from across the room, exchanged glances with one of the assistants. She had a feeling something was about to happen. Daniel was many things, but he was never silent when it came to Clara. And the way he looked right now, like a man who had made up his mind. Then the host announced Daniel's name. A spotlight hit the stage. Applause rose. Daniel walked up slowly, taking his time, scanning the room as he moved. Every step added weight to the moment. No one had any idea what he was about to say, but they were all about to find out. Daniel reached the microphone, letting the applause fade before he spoke. The room grew quiet, expecting the usual speech, something about business growth, partnerships, maybe a few light jokes. But his silence stretched just long enough to stir unease. He looked across the crowd, not smiling, not performing, just watching. "I'm grateful for this evening," he began, his voice steady. "Grateful for the recognition, the support, and the years we've built something together." Polite nods followed, a few claps. Then he paused again. "But tonight, I saw something that reminded me why success means nothing without integrity." Now the clapping stopped. Daniel glanced toward the doors, where Clara had quietly re-entered, unnoticed by most. She stood near the back, still in the same simple dress, still holding herself with quiet grace. He continued, "My wife came here tonight to support me. She didn't come for attention or compliments, but instead of being welcomed, she was ignored, dismissed, even mocked." A ripple moved through the room. Faces shifted. Whispers began. Daniel let it settle, then dropped the next line. "Some of you work for me. Some of you want to. Some of you are doing deals with my company right now. And yet, not one of you recognized the woman who has been behind every step of my journey." Then came the twist no one expected. He turned slightly. "Before I go further, let me introduce the new owner of this venue." Confused glances flickered around. Then Daniel raised his hand, not toward himself, but toward Clara. "That's right. As of an hour ago, we finalized the deal. Clara owns this entire property." Gasps broke out across the floor. Eyes darted toward Clara, stunned and wide. She didn't say a word, just stood quietly, her expression calm, and just like that, the room realized they hadn't just underestimated a woman, they'd misjudged the real power in the room. But what Daniel was about to reveal next would shake the foundation even more. A thick silence hung over the ballroom. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, all eyes turned toward Clara. Some stared in disbelief. Others, suddenly recognizing her value, scrambled to fix their expressions. But it was too late. The quiet woman they had overlooked now stood taller than anyone in the room. Daniel stepped back from the microphone, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he spoke again, voice sharper now. You judged someone based on what she wore. You dismissed kindness and humility because it didn't fit your image of status. Tonight was never about this gala. It was about respect, something money can't buy, and clearly, some of you still don't understand. He paused, then nodded toward Clara. This venue from now on won't be hosting events like this. We'll be turning it into a community center, a place for people who are too often ignored. People like the woman you refuse to see. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. One of the major sponsors stood up, trying to protest. You can't just cancel this. Daniel cut him off with a look. I already did. People started gathering their things, awkwardly avoiding Clara's gaze. But as they did, something even more surprising happened. Lily, the young executive who had watched it all unfold, walked up to Clara and said softly, "Thank you for reminding us what leadership really looks like." Clara smiled, not with pride, but with quiet understanding. She hadn't asked for revenge. She hadn't asked for anything, but she had been seen. Finally, and just as the room began to clear, Daniel turned back to the mic one last time. "Oh, and one more thing," he said. "For those asking about next year's gala, don't bother. We won't be needing one." The lights dimmed. The music stopped. And just like that, the power in the room shifted, not with noise or applause, but with the silence of truth finally being heard. As the last of the guests slipped out, the room grew quiet again, but this time, it felt different. There was no more tension in the air, just clarity. Clara stood at the edge of the stage now, beside Daniel, hand in hand. She hadn't expected any of this when the night began. All she had wanted was to show up and support her husband. But instead, the night had revealed more than just who had power. It showed who truly had character. The decision to turn the venue into a community center sparked conversations in the days that followed. Articles were written about the woman in the simple dress, about the businessman who stood up not just for his partner, but for something bigger. Clara's story became a quiet symbol of humility and strength. She didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway, not because of her wealth, but because of her grace. Lily was promoted weeks later, not because of what she wore to the gala, but because Daniel saw in her the same honesty and courage he valued in Clara. And the rest of the team learned a lesson they wouldn't forget, not just about business, but about people. Daniel never threw another gala. He didn't need to. From that point on, he and Clara focused their energy on creating spaces that welcomed everyone. No red ropes, no gold invitations, just open doors. And though Clara never changed her style or tried to fit into the expectations of that world, people began to change how they saw her. Because real elegance, they realized, wasn't about labels or status. It was about presence. And Clara's quiet presence had spoken louder than any speech, dress, or title ever could. In the end, it wasn't about owning a venue or making a statement. It was about being seen. And that night, Clara was finally seen, not for what she wore, but for who she truly was.